Okay, good. All right, let's go back into the text, get grounded where we're at. I'm going to do a similar introduction to what I did last week because we're still in this same section. We'll be in this section for probably another couple of classes. I may be able to finish it in the next one, but probably not. Again, this is our fifth class. The section that we're in pertains to verses 10 through 48, which, as we see, has to do with this idea of karmic cause and effect and the antidotes to these. And so we're, again, using this analogy of this wheel weapon, this sharp wheel that we send out, in a sense, harming others or doing things that are negative towards others. And it comes back around like a boomerang to cause us suffering, to cause pain and difficulty for us. So these verses have a very similar format, at least through verse 45. The last few have a slightly different format, where we first see a specific result that is being highlighted and worked with. The second line is a refrain from this that is not, it's your karma, but it's essentially saying that this is the sharp weapons of bad actions turning against us. So it's our own bad actions that have come back around to create our own suffering. And recall how that's primarily, though not exclusively, the result that is similar to the cause in terms of our experience. So if we've done something that is causing harm and difficulty for others, we'll experience some similar harm. It's not all of the results of our karma, and we will see even in one of the versus tonight, environmental karma, environmental results from our karma, which is another result. But most of the results we see are where we have created a particular type of action, and therefore that type of thing is coming back as an experience for us. Line C is the very specific cause of that, according to these teachings. We can't often tell what the cause of our karma is. We can tell in a general way, but there are some interesting insights that we're getting in this text in terms of these more specific causes for why we are having that experience. And then line D, the final line, is the antidote, the specific remedy. What is it that we need to do to reverse that so that we don't experience it again? And of course, that we also want to overcome the mindsets that lead us down that pathway, the mind of self-cherishing in particular. So recall that the advice that's given to work with these verses, not necessarily in this order, but to enact the specific remedy, that we get at that last line. Purify any negativities we've created with the four opponent powers, which I've talked about previously. And then one of the practices, of course, that helps us to make this into a Mahayana mind training technique is to practice Tonglen, to think about others who are experiencing the same suffering that we are, that is being detailed in these verses, and then to want to take on their suffering and to want to give them peace of mind, happiness, what have you. So again, Tonglen is something that, although it's not mentioned in Geshe Jumpa Gyatso, my teacher's commentary on this text, in every commentary on every verse, it's nonetheless there in the background as something that we should be practicing as we go through all of this. So before I get back into the verses, I did send out a little meditation. John had that go out through Sarah's email a few days ago. You probably haven't had a chance to look at it so much, but it's Lama Zopa's advice on driving while using this technique of seeing it as the wheel of sharp weapons. So hopefully you'll have a chance to work with that. Again, I imagine you're not driving that much as what you normally were before the pandemic. I certainly am not. But nonetheless, when I am out, even just going around town here, there's lots of opportunities to work with the wheel of sharp weapons while driving. Lots of people who are going a little bit faster than what I do, and maybe even behaving in ways that I would not want to experience. So you have to again see that as the ripening of your own karma, and then to even be grateful that these beings are giving you this lesson. That's a whole nother aspect of it that we haven't touched on so much. But, it's not that we're happy that they're doing these negative things, but we have to look at it from the vantage point of we're receiving a lesson from them. So we can hold them in that space of gratitude in spite of the fact that we wouldn't agree with what they're doing in general, because it's not, helpful for them to be engaging in negativity. But if we're experiencing that towards us, it's always our own stuff, like that refrain. This is the wheel of sharp weapons coming back turning back against us is kind of the refrain that we hear in this. So. All right, so let's get back into the last two verses that we had last week were 26 and 27 that both had to do with illness. And the normal cause that we always said of illness is that we've created harm to others' bodies, but we saw two different things being said out there in regard to chronic illness as well as more acute illnesses. And it was specifically in the context of those sorts of things that become obstacles for us in terms of our Dharma practice. So that's why it was a little bit different. So recall that that second one ended with the idea of abandoning, our non-virtuous actions, and that the reason why we might be struck by a contagious disease is because we performed deeds that degenerated our pledges, that broke the commitments that we have with our gurus. And I shared right at the end a little kind of tonglen that we can do with our gurus. Recall again that with our gurus, we're not taking on their negative karma, because ideally we want to not think they have negative karma. We want to hold the view that they are pure and that they've developed their minds to a much greater degree to where they're not creating that negative karma. If we can even think of them as a Buddha, that's the ideal in this tradition, but nonetheless, at least to think of them as people who have controlled their minds and their behavior, and therefore they don't really have the negative karma, So what we want to do is when we practice Tonglen with our gurus, we are removing the negative karma of sentient beings, especially their disciples, their students, such as ourselves, who have created negativities in relationship to the guru. If the gurus are Buddhists, again, I talked about this a little bit last week, then from their side, they are intending to be there and to continue to teach, but we create our obstacles. That's, the way that we do that is through the actions we engage in, the karma that we create that goes against what our gurus are asking us to do, or that we make commitments to them to do, the pledges that we break that are, again, are part of that particular verse. So Geshe-la said, I didn't share the one little side, but he essentially said, this is the best long life puja that we can do for our gurus, and is to take on all of that negativity that is created by ourselves and other beings that have a relationship with that guru, and then to give away all of our happiness and so on, so that it becomes the cause for the gurus to continue to abide, so that we have that kind of long life result for this type of practice of Tonglen. Again, we're not taking anything away from them. We're mostly working with the negativities that we and others like us have created in relationship to the guru. So hopefully you were kind of clear on that. And again, I included most of that practice then in the slides, and you can do that as any time that you're thinking of your guru. Or when the gurus manifest some form of illness. When Lama Zopa Rinpoche manifested a stroke in April of 2011, the FPMT was very quick in sending out information about how to work with that. Because again, we don't want to think that Rinpoche's got this negative karma. Rather, we want to think about it as that negative karma manifesting in the form of that illness for him was a product of our own actions, the ways in which we've gone against the wishes of the guru or deteriorated our own commitments to the guru, what have you. So again, if there are questions on that, maybe you can ask towards the end of class, but I just thought I would mention that one again briefly, because I think we kind of ended the class a little bit quickly in terms of going through that one part about the working with the gurus. So we're on to verse 28, and it says in verse 28, whenever we are intellectually confused about all that is to be known, meaning, of course, especially in our Dharma practice, right? It is the sharp weapons of bad actions turning against us. Why? For having considered that which is worthy to be set aside to be the Dharma. In other words, that which is not the Dharma, that we shouldn't be engaging in, we take it as our Dharma. We take it as what we would actually rather practice, rather do, something which is not worthy to be the Dharma. So now the advice we get is we should cultivate the wisdom of hearing and the rest. We should really dedicate ourselves to developing the Dharma as much as possible in our minds. So let's go to the the commentary from Geshe Jampa Gyatso. Again, this was my teacher in the master's program, my main guru, who I feel, very close to, and still, even though he's gone, he left in this plane of being, if you will, in November of 2007, and his reincarnation was never identified. I kind of have the feeling he's here somewhere, but nonetheless, I've never met anyone that I thought was him. So I just have to work with the gurus always being there in some way through what we do and how we live our lives, what have you. So again, this is verse 29 that I just read. Oh, not 29. Oh, it should be 28. Sorry, I'm on the wrong page. 28, whenever we are intellectually confused. Sorry about that. So Geshe-la says in his commentary, for example, even though we listened and reflected when we studied in school and so forth, when we listen now, we do not retain the words. And when we think, we do not understand the meaning. Intellectually, we are extremely confused, like a donkey that has been hit on the head with a stick. It's a horrible analogy, poor donkey. But this is this kind of stupefied state that we might find ourselves in, and this might be the case for some of you. I hope not tonight, but sometimes in Dharma teachings, right? Or when we're reading a Dharma book and we find ourselves reading the same passage over and over again, and it's just not getting in. So we have those times when it's very hard for us to engage in the Dharma. We feel somewhat confused. So it says, then also when we meditate, we are utterly unable to clarify the observed object, the aspect, and so forth, there being simply darkness, simply dullness. We're unable to really make the mind's focus and engage in the proper level of meditation. Okay, so when such things happen, think, the truth is that this is the sharp weapons turning against me, of the bad actions committed in previous rebirths, of mainly engaging in non-Dharma actions, and of considering Dharma actions worthy of being set aside, saying, although I did not do them, there is no fault. That whenever there was anything that was to be left out of our lives, we left the Dharma out. We just said, okay, well, I'll just leave that to the side and I'll do all the other things that I need to do. Again, kind of get busy with all of our worldly affairs that we put more importance on and place more attention, pay more attention to than our practice of the Dharma. So now the advice that is given in the verse is then from now on, we should cultivate one, the wisdom arisen from hearing, of having listened to the Holy Dharma, as well as those included in the rest, which are secondly, the wisdom arisen from thinking, contemplating, and third, the wisdom arisen from meditating. These three levels of wisdom are the three types of wisdom we often speak of. They are a bit of a hierarchy because there's no way we can get to the wisdom from meditating without having thought about the teachings, and we can't even think about the teachings unless we've heard them, we've listened to them. So the very first step is always to listen to the teachings, and it doesn't just mean through our ears. Obviously, there are many ways to listen to teachings live like this, or in videotapes, or audio tapes, what have you. You can do that and get it through your ear consciousness. But also, it's reading, it's working with the teachings in any way that helps to bring them into our sphere of experience. So that there's already, I like how they call it the wisdom from hearing, because even just hearing the teachings, there's already some wisdom that we should be generating. It's not yet developed in any great degree because we haven't kind of picked apart the teachings and gotten to know them in deeper detail. But that's the second step. And that's actually what we now call our meditating. Even though the third one is called wisdom arisen from meditating, the second one is more akin to what most of us have in our meditation right now, which is simply reflecting on the teachings, spending some time in analytical meditation, picking them apart, kind of understanding the various points, working with it so that we then have a deeper understanding. It's not just superficial from having heard it, it actually takes it a little bit deeper. The wisdom arisen from meditating, based on all of that thinking and reflection, together with a deeper state of concentration, we then can develop that type of wisdom. The wisdom arisen from meditating, for most of us, if you don't have calm abiding or something that is close to that, you don't have the potential for that wisdom to arise. Because the wisdom arisen from meditating is one that needs to kind of take deeper root in our minds. And that can only be done when we've calmed the mind through the force of our meditative concentration. So those of you who've studied the Lam Rim before know that the perfection of concentration and the perfection of wisdom are the last two of the six perfections that are presented on the Bodhisattva path. And concentration means developing that mind that we call calm abiding, or shamatha in Sanskrit. It means being able to be single-pointedly focused for as long as we wish on whatever object we choose, and having this great serviceability, pliancy of body and mind. And again, it's a pretty amazing attainment, but all of us can attain it. In fact, the teachers say that we've all attained it in previous lifetimes. We just never used it for anything that productive. It's a very peaceful state. And calm abiding essentially means that. Shine in Tibetan means to abide in peace, to abide in a very calm state. And some people just do it for the sake of that. But in Buddhism, we do it as a tool to unite it with the second of these two, the sixth perfection, the perfection of wisdom, which is where we bring in those wisdom teachings through our own investigation, and we cultivate what is called special insight, which is usually referring to the wisdom of emptiness, but we can also generate some form of special insight, or vipassana, as it's called in the Sanskrit, towards whatever object we're analyzing. So when we hear Buddha's teachings, like what we're doing in this course, the initial thing is to hear them, listen to them, already generate some wisdom by hearing the words that I'm saying and making sense of them, organizing them in your own mind, and then to spend some time after the class thinking about them, reflecting on them, meditating on them. Recall that these verses, all of these versified texts, are generally meditation tools. We can sit down and meditate on each of these verses and kind of reflect on them and think about, even if we aren't experiencing that particular suffering right now, we can think about in the past maybe we have, or in the future we could project to what it would be like to have to go through that type of suffering. And think about what Dharma Rakshita is sharing in this, in each verse, about how we created that karma, how we need to have an antidote to that. So essentially, we can use this as a meditation tool to begin to reflect on these teachings. Then over time, eventually you can develop the third level of wisdom, wisdom arising from meditation, when you have calmed the mind to that degree, when you have that single pointed focus that can delve much more deeply into these topics and make your realization stable. And so we often call that our stabilizing meditation. Because if the mind isn't stable, it's not going to stick. We'll meditate on it and it might hit home for a bit, but then, it goes away. It becomes very temporary. So anyway, I won't talk that much more about these three wisdoms, but just know that this is part of the process that we need to engage in as the antidote to this particular dilemma of having this confused mind when we're hearing Dharma teachings. I mean, it sounds kind of strange because you're going to have to use the exact tools to create that wisdom that are, somewhat obstructed by what you're experiencing, the intellectual confusion. But nonetheless, again, do some accompanying practices of purification through the four opponent powers. Do some Tong Len, sit quietly thinking about all those others who are just like you, or maybe even worse off than you, that come to teachings and they come away with a foggier mind than what you have. And they can't, really investigate the teachings to the degree that would be ideal. Take on their suffering, take that away from them, and give them what you have. It doesn't have to be your clarity. It can be your good karma that manifests for them in the form of a very clear mind, a mind that knows the Dharma quickly, sharply, that has a clarity to the Dharma that allows that person to know the Dharma very well. So you can work with each of these again in terms of a Tong Len practice. And this one is a very powerful one, I think, to do. And we all experience this to some degree. Maybe after I finish what Geshe Sopa says, I'll tell you a story of the first time I went to hear His Holiness teach. But so Geshe Sopa shares a bit about this that I thought was worth including. He says, when our minds become dull or blocked from understanding any type of knowledge, especially religious knowledge, it is a result of our past non-virtuous actions. When you try to, when you try to analyze what you are studying, you feel mentally dull and are unable to do so. You may try to meditate or to memorize a text, but you just can't succeed. He uses the same quote that Geshe did at that time: your mind is as dull as that of a donkey. Not a donkey hit by a stick, which is good, but nonetheless, a donkey. I don't know how smart donkeys are. I don't think they're renowned as being particularly intelligent, but the cause of such mental darkness is that in the past, we chose what was good for us from a worldly perspective rather than what was in accordance with the Dharma. When we had a choice, it was like, oh, I'll take all this mundane, crazy stuff and I'll leave behind the Dharma. I won't engage in the Dharma. For example, when there's a choice between a Dharma teaching and a wonderful show, you have to choose which is really suitable. Sometimes we choose entertainment over Dharma. I'm sure that that's happened, with every one of us, where we said, "Oh, I know there's a teaching. Venerable Rabin is doing a teaching, but I'm going to chill and watch Netflix," or whatever the case might be. We must understand this and vow to avoid frivolous activities and to apply ourselves to religious teachings from now on, so as to gain the wisdom that comes from study, hearing, from examination, which is what we called again thinking or contemplation, and then from meditation, the three types of wisdom that we need to develop. So again, the story I was going to tell you about this in regard to His Holiness is the very first time I attended one of His Holiness's teachings. I saw him in a public talk at the Greek Theater in Berkeley, but I went down to Pasadena. They were doing teachings as a preliminary to giving the great initiation of Chenrezig, the thousand-armed Chenrezig initiation. And the whole morning when His Holiness was teaching, I just could not focus on a single word. I was just like, what is he talking about? I have no idea. And we also, I have to admit that we didn't have the best translator for that in my estimation, looking back. And I'm not trying to fault him. It was my own karma, obviously, that created that situation, my own dullness and what have you that I was bringing forward from my past actions. But we do have those occasions where we might sit in front of somebody who's a very erudite speaker, giving us all sorts of information, and we just can't take it in. It's just there's nothing there. I mean, I was falling asleep there in this auditorium with His Holiness, and I was really a bit embarrassed at some level. I'd been studying the Dharma not that long, maybe about 4 years in some manner, but even not that seriously until maybe a year or two before that. So I mean, I can't really say that I had that much kind of knowledge to come into a teaching with His Holiness. In fact, Venerable Rabina, who was my first teacher in the FPMT, she told me once that she thought it was her job as a teacher of Dharma in an FPMT center to prepare students to be able to hear His Holiness and to get something out of it. And I feel like I could say that that is some role that I've stepped into as well in the teaching that I do, is to give people enough information so that when you go to hear His Holiness, because he does teach at a pretty high level, to be able to get something out of it. But regardless, I don't even remember what he was saying in that teaching. I'm sure there was plenty of it I could have understood, but I just had this huge obstacle. But what was kind of funny is by the afternoon session, things had cleared up a bit. I don't know. I mean, I got through some sort of karmic wall, and then I was on the other side of it, and things were actually going along much better. But by then, also, Jeffrey Hopkins, he was there, and he started translating as well. So he would throw in some comments because he knew that this translator who was there, this was before Tipton Jinpa started translating for His Holiness. This translator was leaving out an awful lot. And so I'm not, again, blaming it on that. This was my stuff, and I'll take ownership of it. That's why I was the one that was dozing off in the Pasadena auditorium or wherever where this was at. So know that it happens to all of us, and we can identify then from this text the karma that we're creating for that. Let's go on to 29. I'll just go to the text, Geshe-la's commentary for reading this one. Whenever we are afflicted by sleep while practicing the Dharma, it is the sharp weapons of bad actions turning against us for having accumulated obscurations with respect to the holy Dharma. Now we should undergo hardships for the sake of the Dharma. So sleep, that was what I was talking about too. Sleep can happen also when we are trying to meditate, when we are trying to study, as well as certainly in teachings. We might fall asleep. I guess that's maybe one advantage to Zoom is you can turn off your camera and you can sleep through the whole teaching if you want. I'm not saying it's a real advantage. I'm just saying that people might, be less embarrassed if they're sleeping through it because nobody knows they're sleeping. But anyway, this is something that does happen to us, right? We might sit down to meditate and we have like zero energy for meditation and we're constantly falling asleep. And then somebody says, "Oh, you want to watch a movie on Netflix?" And then we go, "Oh, yeah." And then we watch like a 2-hour movie and we have perfect concentration. Well, why does that happen? Why do we have this sleep pattern or this tiredness, this lethargy when we try to practice? So Geshe-la says here in his commentary, for example, when chanting during debate sessions and so forth, or alternatively, when applying ourselves to daily recitations, listening to the Dharma and so forth, it really happens to many people that they become afflicted by sleep. When this happens, think, in previous rebirths, I accumulated obscurations in relation to the scriptural Dharma by, for example, walking on Dharma texts. This, of course, is something that we learned from the beginning is really not ideal. We should be treating the Dharma as very precious, very holy, putting it in elevated places, never putting it on the floor, never walking on it, sitting on it, what have you. Um, these sorts of things that we've done that have disrespected the Dharma without even the slightest concern, crumpling them, wiping snot and so forth on them. Um, if I accumulated obscurations, he says, also in relation to the realized Dharma by criticizing eminent debaters possessing the qualities of realization in their continua. And the Sangha, for example, the Ka Rabjam Geshes, saying, you blazing ember pledge breakers. This is an insult that you can say to somebody. Essentially, it means when you say that they're blazing, we mean that they're sort of sharp-tongued, but they're an ember, meaning they're sort of dry. That it's sort of all the heat has been taken out, or the moisture has been taken out by the heat. So it essentially means that they're giving off dry words, that there's nothing in their speech that is worthwhile. So that's why you would call somebody a blazing ember pledge breaker. Um, uh, I don't know, these are terms maybe that they use on the debate grounds. So what was pointed out here, if we look at this in terms of these two things that are the reasons, the first one had to do with scriptural Dharma. That's what it says in that fourth line at the end, right? I accumulated obscurations in relation to the scriptural Dharma. And that's the texts that contain the Dharma by, stepping on them, putting them in places that aren't, respectful for them and so on. And then go down another couple lines and you'll see that it's obscurations in relation to the realized Dharma. These are the two aspects of the Dharma, the scripture that teaches these teachings, as well as the realizations of those teachings in the minds of others. So that's why that second one had to do with, criticizing people who have actually very sharp minds and are good debaters and possess those realizations in their minds. And by saying negative things to them, such as, you blazing ember pledge breaker. I mean, this isn't something that if somebody said that to you in a parking lot or something, you probably would just ignore them, but on the debate grounds, I guess this is a pretty serious offense. So again, these were the two things with the Dharma. When we say in respect to the holy Dharma, we mean in respect to the scripture and in respect to the realizations of the Dharma that are within the minds of beings by criticizing those beings. So then the next part, therefore, this is retribution for the obscurations I accumulated in relation to the holy Dharma. Again, both scriptural and realizational. Then do taking and giving. See how I said he sometimes throws it in the commentary? To do Tonglen, to think about all those others who are falling asleep while engaging in spiritual practice. Take on their negative results, what the suffering they're experiencing, give them the sharp mind, the intellect, the ability to uphold the Dharma through their own understanding and what have you. Again, we can practice Tonglen as an effective means of combating our tendency to be mostly focused on ourselves. Then the final verse or the final line of that verse, the commentary on that is, from now on, in addition to not acting with the slightest disrespect and so forth toward the Dharma, we should undergo even more hardships for the sake of the Dharma. So it kind of goes beyond just saying you should stop, doing negative things that are disrespectful towards the Dharma. You should even be much more willing to engage in whatever hardships you have to in order to practice the Dharma. We have a reluctance sometimes to practice hardships. It is difficult to practice the Dharma fully, to engage in all the various things that are set out. This is a very complex path. There are many practices that you're advised to engage in, the purification practices, the accumulation of merit, all these what are called the ngundro, the preliminary practices. There's, of course, all the hard work we have to do in studying continually and meditating and, trying to develop our minds. And then, of course, when we're off the cushion, doing what we can to keep our minds somewhat guarded by, making sure that we don't go astray. We have to undergo some level of hardships. I did want to share a little bit about hardships from Geshe Sopa's text. He says in his section, he says, we must show great respect and interest towards the teachings, progressively gaining more understanding and ridding ourselves of barriers to our comprehension of them. We have to make special efforts and endure any hardship in this undertaking. And he uses this example, which I found really quite moving to read about. He says, for example, many of the monks, and he's talking here about in Tibet, at Drepung, Sera, and Ganden monasteries, these are the three main monasteries of the Gelug tradition, the tradition of Lama Tsongkhapa. They came from distant places like Amdo or Mongolia. I mean, we know where Mongolia is. Amdo is, I think, in the eastern part of Tibet, quite a ways from Lhasa. He says in order to reach Lhasa, they had to walk for a month or more through difficult, uninhabited areas, enduring heat, winds, hunger, and thirst. I imagine they had to endure cold as well. When I traveled in Tibet in 1994, it would be very hot during the day sometimes because you're such a high elevation. The sun seems like it's right in your right above your head. And then at night it would get so cold. Anyway, he says they underwent such hardships, even risking death, in order to study the Dharma, just to get to Lhasa, to be able to get to the monasteries, to study the Dharma. Even once they got to the monasteries, there was often not enough to eat, and they had to live in very poor conditions. You should resolve that from now on you will gladly endure any hardship for the Dharma. And we look at our lives, every one of us in the comfort of our own homes, I imagine, or a home that is your home for right now, and you're able to partake of the Dharma in a way that isn't about much hardship at all. You're sitting in front of a computer very comfortably, didn't have to go through great pains and difficulties to get to this place where you could receive the Dharma. So we have to put that dedication into perhaps the other things that we do when we're not engaged in teachings, because it is actually quite easy to get the Dharma these days, especially again, given what's happened with the explosion of things online with the pandemic. All you have to do is just look at almost any website for a Dharma center, and they've got something going on at almost, well, maybe every day of the week, certainly, but in almost every moment of every day of the week. At least TNL's filling their schedule to that degree some of the times. So I wanted to share another little quote that came from a teaching that Rinpoche gave that I was at in 2004. This was at the master's program in Italy, the retreat that Rinpoche did for about 4 weeks with other students as well as the master's program students. And he made this quote that I went back and I listened to it to make sure I got the wording right. But he says, seeking pleasure, which results in only suffering, that you should not do. So what he means by this is going after those transitory pleasures, such as, the night of binge watching on Netflix, which if we do it with a mind of attachment and a mind that is, totally about laziness and what have you, all these non-virtues, it's only going to result in suffering. We think it results in happiness because we feel good watching a really entertaining movie or TV show or whatever. But, this is only going to result in suffering. Now, we can do that with a different motivation. And I'm not saying that we should completely avoid anything that is some form of entertainment or a way of renewing our strength and energy to do more practice. But we have to be careful. It's a very slippery slope, So seeking pleasure, which results in only suffering, no, that's, verboten. His Rinpoche is saying, that's really not what we should be doing with our lives. Seeking suffering, which results in only happiness, that you should do. That's what we talk about here is these hardships. The suffering that it does take to turn away from all the things that we would much rather do, all the ways that we would much rather spend our time through the force of, once more, these twin demons, our self-cherishing mind and our self-grasping mind, that are habituated to those sorts of activities. So again, we have to keep this in mind. These forms of difficulty, hardships of turning away from those patterns and moving towards the Dharma are only going to result in happiness. In the moment, we might not feel as happy, but that's because our self-grasping mind and self-cherishing mind aren't getting what they want. They're moving away from those minds that we do need to abandon. So again, keep this in mind. I really like that, and I was struck by that teaching, and I wrote it in my notes in a very cursory way, and then went back to the audio recordings of those teachings, and I can say this is a pretty much accurate quote of what Rinpoche was saying, and I try to remember this when I can. I'm not saying I've exceeded in any way in overcoming all of my pleasure, which leads to suffering, but nonetheless, I can see it a little more clearly, perhaps due to Rinpoche's kindness. So. Let's go on to the next verse, continue on for a little bit longer. This is verse number 30. It says, whenever there is liking for the afflictions and great distraction, it is the sharp weapons of bad actions turning against us for not having meditated on impermanence and the shortcomings of cyclic existence. Now we should develop strong repulsion for cyclic existence, develop this mind that we call the mind of renunciation, that clearly sees that we have to turn away from the happiness of this life as well as the happiness of samsara towards goals that will help us to actually accomplish greater realizations and so on. So let's go to Geshe-la's commentary on this. I realize there have been some comments in the chat box. Maybe I should look at those before I go further. I'm not sure if they're, oh, these are from John. Okay. Somebody was saying I'm totally asleep. Sorry, Pamene. At least you're recognizing it. Okay, so let's go to the, again, Geshe Jampa Gyatso's wonderful commentary on this, his brief commentary. Let me push it up a little bit so that all of it is on the screen because we don't need the verse there. So liking for the afflictions, that was in the first line, whenever there is liking for the afflictions. He says this is, for example, when seeing the excellent wealth, excellent food and drink, and excellent clothing of others, to like the attachment that thinks, may this definitely happen to me. It's that mind of kind of, yeah, being enthralled with the, what we call the perfections of samsara, which really are not perfections, but they are the excellent things that others have that exists in this world that we want to obtain for ourselves. Again, that's that preoccupation with all these worldly affairs. Similarly, there is liking for anger. You know, many people have a liking for anger, that delusion. Enjoy having arguments with other people. And I mean, it's not that they really enjoy it, but they become very habituated to it, to where it would be a form of liking, as well as liking for delusion, in the sense that while delusion is mainly considered in Buddhist philosophy to be ignorance and so forth, delusion is used in the world also to refer to sleep. And there is thorough liking for sleep, due to which there is striving for it. You know, a lot of people spend a lot of time, good portion of their day in sleep, and can have a great, attachment to sleep or whatever, to be under the control of that delusion. Um, Again, not all sleep is delusional. I'm not trying to make it into one of our root delusions by any means, but nonetheless, due to all the other factors that contribute to our in wanting to engage in sleep, it becomes non-virtuous through that. Great distraction was the other part of that first line. Whenever there is first liking for the afflictions and second great distraction, he defines that as, for instance, to become exhausted solely for distraction, such as engaging in commerce without having time to practice the Dharma. Of course, it's not just engaging in business and other things that we do for a living. It can also mean engaging in entertainment, engaging in social activities with friends and what have you, engaging in sports. I mean, again, we might need to do some things to maintain this body and to maintain friendships with others, but it can become a distraction. And we all know this from our lives, when these things do become a distraction, when they do go outside of the norm of what we would want to do ideally to be able to keep the room for the Dharma and to remember the importance of this life and how to use it well and what have you. So Geshe-la goes on then to say, this is our second line of each verse again, right in this section. When these things happen, think, this is my own karma. This is retribution. Here specifically, going into that third line, for not having meditated in the past on two things, and specifically, although there are many other topics that would aid in this. The first one is impermanence. And by impermanence, we don't just mean the changing nature of things right now. We mean the impermanence that is our own mortality. The fact that death is inevitable for us, and we have to be mindful of that. The shortcomings of cyclic existence, these are referring to the various faults that we can see. If we look, we will see them very clearly. And I'll share some slides on both of those in a moment. So having not done that, this is why we're experiencing all of this, why we see that the mind gets so distracted and caught up in mundane affairs and has such a strong liking for the afflictions. So he says, then do taking and giving. Think about others who are plagued by these same things that we're discussing here in relation to ourselves. Take that away from them, give them, all of the good karma that will help them to have a perfect understanding of the teachings of the Buddha, especially on impermanence and the shortcomings of samsara and so on, and that they attain great realizations through our giving away our happiness to them. And then the specific antidote, the last sentence, from now on, through meditating on impermanence and so forth again and again, we should develop the mind to definitely emerge from the abodes of cyclic existence. This phrase, definitely emerge, that is actually the literal translation of Ngenjong. Ngenjong is the Tibetan for renunciation, and it means to emerge certainly, definitely, to want a mind that is intent upon emerging from the craziness of cyclic existence of samsara. Without a doubt, we will do that. We are certain to do that. Again, recall that what we have to mainly turn away from are the pleasurable things of samsara. Everyone can renounce the grosser forms of suffering we experience, right? Who wants to experience that? No, thank you. I don't have a problem renouncing aging and illness and death and what have you. Where we have the problem is that we get caught up in the pleasures of samsara. And that's why, again, we enjoy the sleep and we enjoy, all the various activities that we engage in, all of our mundane affairs. So let me go into a little bit with the slides, and then we'll take a break after this. I'll just point out some of the main points that we want to engage in this meditation. Since this is the advice that Dhammarakshita is giving us, I think it's important that we know how to go about this. I won't go into all 9 points of the 9-point death awareness meditation, but know that they are divided into 3 sets of 3 that are underneath the 3 roots. The very first one is to contemplate the certainty of death, to recall that everyone dies and that we are continually moving towards that death. It's like the sands of an hourglass that are continuing to go through from the top chamber to the bottom chamber without any stop. We can't plug it up for a moment and say, I'm going to take a break from all this, and put off death for a little bit longer. It just keeps getting closer and closer. And that therefore we have to be mindful of the fact that how much time do we really create for the practice of Dharma in this life, recognizing that death is going to come without a doubt for every one of us. Secondly, the one that really gets us into our Dharma practice, that really assures that we're going to not have these patterns of, engaging in attachment to mundane affairs, is recognizing that it's uncertain when death will happen. And there are a number of points under that as well, the 3 points having mostly to do with the fact that there is no certainty to how long we live. We like to think that, because some people, maybe the majority, live out their lives to their old age and then eventually die from old age or illnesses that occur when their bodies are more feeble. But there's no certainty to that. People die, and we're certainly seeing it with COVID, right? Although the larger portion perhaps are in the older category, we have young people dying from it. We have middle-aged people dying from it. We have children dying from it. There's no certainty as to when people will die. And again, that really gets us moving in the direction of practicing Dharma, right? That's the reason for that being one of the most important points in the death awareness meditation. The third one is the idea that at the time of death, nothing helps except our spiritual practice. And in that one, you look at the 3 things that we tend to rely upon in our lives, which are our friends, our resources, and of course, even our own body, that we tend to so carefully throughout this life. And all 3 of them can be found to be utterly useless at the time of death. Now, I'm not saying that if you have a large amount of money that you're going to have a little more comfort leading into your death. You can pay for a fancy room at some hospice or something. And then you might also have friends that can be there to keep your mouth wet as you're moving into the death process, or, hold your hand or whatever you feel you need. And also certainly our own bodies, we might have some comfort still with our bodies, even though many of them might be, ravaged by illness when death approaches. But when you actually go into the death process, you have to leave all of that behind. None of it goes with you. Not a penny of your resources, certainly no one else in your circle of friends, and your body itself has to be left behind. what goes with you is your spiritual practice. And that is also what will help you to keep a calm mind at the time of death, is the degree to which you have worked with your mind and have the assurance that you can die peacefully, knowing you did what you needed to do in this human life. So this reinforces the idea of a precious human rebirth, because it's the end of that precious human rebirth. It's the fact that it will end, certain to end, uncertain when it will end. And at the time of its ending, what will be most important is how we have used this human life. So that's why the impermanence meditation is so important, the death awareness one in particular. And Geshe Jampa Gyatso emphasized that in his commentary on his commentary. Then we need to also look at the shortcomings of samsara. This is one presentation that comes from the Lam Rim. Both this one and the previous slide are the titles that are used in the Lam Rim Chenmo of Lama Tsongkhapa, the great treatise on the stages of the path. The first one, the fault of uncertainty. This is something that we have been seeing with regard to COVID, certainly, right? All of a sudden, the certainty that we had a year ago before all this happened was just completely pulled out from underneath us. And we saw the uncertainty of samsara, that suddenly there was no certainty around hardly anything. Yeah, and if everyone can recall what it was like about a year ago when all this broke. That was the biggest meditation I was doing, was like, oh, this is showing me the fault of uncertainty, the fault of insatiability, or the fact that we can't be satisfied in what we desire, that we keep looking for things and wanting more things. And that kind of dissatisfaction is an undercurrent in regard to our lives. It's always driving us on to want something else. And we never get satisfied within samsara. They say if you take all the food we've eaten while we've had beginningless rebirths, and all the water and liquids that we've drank, they would fill oceans and land masses like you wouldn't believe. This is our insatiable nature of samsara. The third, and the fourth, these next two, have to do with the fact that we have to cast off bodies repeatedly, meaning we have to leave an existence and die, which is a painful experience for most beings. And moreover, it doesn't give us anything lasting with regard to that. We might get a really good rebirth and then it's gone. But then we have to take rebirth again. It's not like that's over then. A lot of people think, well, I'll just get this life over with and I'm done. Well, no, then you take repeated rebirth. You have to continually go back into new aggregates, a new body with a different mind in terms of the coarser levels of that mind, and have different experiences. Then the fifth one, this is the fault of repeatedly descending from high to low, and of course, vice versa. We go all over the place. They say that we've had every possible rebirth within samsara, and probably had them countless times, all the way from the highest one, which is called the peak of cyclic existence, a very subtle state in a formless realm where you don't even have a body that's gross, a coarser body, and then all the way down to the Avicii hell, the worst of the 8 hot hells, that is called unrelenting torment, which essentially means that you're never getting a respite from any sort of pain and torment you're experiencing in that hell realm. And we've done everything in between. We have been all over the place. We go from high to low and low to high and middle to high and middle to low and da 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 da, all over the place. This is the nature of samsara. It's one of its major faults. And then this one's an interesting one, the fault of having no companions. We have companions on a temporary basis, right? You all have companions in your life right now, your parents, your children, your partners, your pets, the people, friends, people that you have some close relationship with. But they're really not any sort of lasting companions. You might reconnect with them through the force of karma in another life, but you'll have a different form. They'll have a different form. You end up going from life to life alone. You don't go together. Even if two people die together, there's no guarantee they're going to the same place together. Depends upon their own individual karma, depends upon the state of their minds when they die. Essentially, throughout all of our existences, we've always been alone. We have temporary companions that we get quite attached to, and that becomes problematic in and of itself. But we never have anyone that we are on this journey with. We're essentially alone. And that's a reality we all have to deal with, showing once more the fault of samsara. So again, these are the things that we would want to meditate on, as well as the other faults of samsara that are set out in the Lam Rim. And they help us then to gain the type of conviction that we're talking about here, in terms of being able to make sure that we dedicate our time to this life becoming very meaningful, very purposeful, and not in any way wasting a moment. So I'm gonna have to, yeah, turn off my camera anyway when I do the break. I'm getting fuzzy for some reason. That seems to be happening. This toggling back and forth sometimes between the text and the camera sometimes makes this camera I have get a little out of focus. But let's take a 10-minute break. I have 7:07. Let's say it's 7:08 for business purposes, and so 7:18 we will reconvene, and I'll ring the bell. So keep your speaker on, and you'll hear that if you wander away from your device. Your hand up. Do you have a question?
Yes, I do. And this isn't exactly in sync with this class, but I've wanted to write you and I haven't gotten around to it. You know, I've heard several times about having red and white flowers together on the altar, that is not a good thing to do because of the somehow the connection with death, I think. But anyway, with the egg and the sperm and or whatever it's called, maybe not that exactly, but sort of that. But I'm a little bit wanting some clarity. I want to understand that better because I thought, gee, do those colors then represent death? I have two friends that are actively dying now, and I have a red and a white candle on my mantle for them, thinking that might ease their death somehow. And but maybe I'm just totally confused about it. I need to understand that a little bit better, if you
Sure.
could. I know you've told us before.
Yeah, you know, I first heard some of this from Venerable Connie when she was here as resident teacher in Santa Fe, and she, of course, taught up in Taos as well. And the main place where you don't want to put those flowers together is on an altar, and especially in the context of like a long life puja, because they do represent, in the tantric teachings, they say that there is a white drop and a red drop. The white
Yes.
drop that is at the crown of the head and the crown chakra in the center of that, and the red drop that is in the navel chakra. And these, when the central channel loosens up, the white drop descends down to the heart center, and the red drop ascends from the navel up to the heart center. And when they meet at the heart center in what's called the indestructible drop, then this is the moment of death when the clear light mind appears, and so on. And that's the connotation behind it, is that by putting something that has those two colors together, especially the flowers on the altar, then that would be symbolic of that. And you wouldn't want to do that because especially you want to create the causes for good health and long lives of your gurus. And that's
Oh,
where I've mostly heard it in relationship with. It's not, I don't think it means anything about like people that we know who are experiencing difficulties. The two candles that you have,
mm,
I mean, I've never heard that being applied in that context, that it would be bad for sentient beings in general. It's mostly around our gurus. And so it not becoming a symbol for the passing by the virtue of those two drops meeting in relationship to the holy beings that we are working with in our flowers on the altar or whatever. Because most of us have pictures of our gurus on the altar. You know, you are
yes.
advised to. And so if you're putting those there as an offering to them, then that would be different. Now, if you're offering the two candles of red and white to your gurus, then that might be something you might want to avoid. I've never heard it specifically around candles. It's usually around flowers, but I would
Yeah.
think it would apply to any substances that we're offering, trying
Yes.
to avoid that color combination for that reason. Having said that, I don't think people should get too overly superstitious around some of these things,
Yes.
I think we have to, yeah, not worry if we did it. We go, oh no, I did that, before. Well, then I'm,
Yeah. Right.
you
But
know,
it would be okay to have red flower alone on the altar.
yeah, I have heard again, Venerable Connie seemed to stress not putting red flowers on the altar so much, but
Okay.
white flowers are perfectly fine. And in most long life pujas, they have white flowers like crazy. I mean, you just see like
Okay.
tons and tons of white
Okay.
flowers.
All
Um,
right.
but the big thing to avoid is both of them together.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
thank you. And my candles are in a different location.
Yeah.
And since it seems to mean some little something to me, I'll just leave them there.
I
And
think so. I think so, Mary Jo. This is creating a connection between you and them, and I think it's got good intention to it, and it's not,
yeah,
in the same context as what we're talking about at all. So,
right. And
okay.
pink, was there something mentioned about pink that I can't remember?
Pink. I don't. I've never heard anything about pink. Has anyone else heard anything about pink?
Venerable Robina mentioned it the other day that she likes for pujas anything that's fluffy pink on the altar.
Oh,
Oh, interesting. Like those
uh,
those Hostess snowballs. We remember those things? They were pink with the coconut on. Those are really anyway. Um,
okay, we'll remember those.
no, I really, what I used to do when I was a kid, maybe you remember those things. They had like the cake inside with that, I don't know, marshmallowy outside, and I would pull the outside off of it and eat
Yes.
that separately from the
Oh,
cake.
yes.
Just like
Yum.
people would take the middle of an Oreo and eat that before the cookie, or even throw the cookie away.
Yes, yes,
Anyway,
yes.
were there other questions? Stella, did you have
Thank
one?
you.
You need
Thank
to
you.
turn on your mic, Stella. Yeah.
So I just have a comment about what I guess it was Mary Jo was
Mhm.
asking. But in Lama Yeshe's book, Big Love, somebody was going to take some red flowers to someone at the hospital who was sick. And
Oh,
he said, never take red flowers to somebody who's sick.
really? Okay.
So yeah,
That,
that was,
yeah.
I always
Okay.
remember that. And I'd never heard that before, but that's what he told them.
So then
So
that would automatically disqualify red and white because you're never going to bring red, period. So maybe
well,
again,
no, just when people are sick,
mhm.
you're not supposed to give them red flowers.
But
I don't know.
yeah, right. But I was just saying that probably then red and white flowers would also be disqualified. So you wouldn't,
Yeah, probably.
because you wouldn't be bringing red. So
Right.
again, I guess there is some connotation with red. That's why I mentioned earlier that Venerable Connie did say don't put red flowers even alone on the altar, even
Uh-huh.
without the white, because it's not a very good way to, again, that auspicious in these customs. Again, I don't. I don't want to make it seem like it's total superstition, because obviously there is rationale behind it. I mean, one thing that I'll share a story, when we were talking about the Dharma earlier and kind of maybe disrespecting the Dharma, one of the things that they say about Dharma or any holy object is to avoid them being in any places that you would find to be, I don't know what the right word for it is, unsavory or unclean. So in like the Christian tradition, like I would go to my grandma's house, she would have a picture of Jesus in the bathroom. It was kind of weird. But you don't put a picture of the Buddha in the bathroom, and you don't even take your Dharma in the bathroom. When I first started learning the Dharma, it was when I was learning with Venerable Rabina. I was reading Jeffrey Hopkins' book, Meditation on Emptiness, and I was enjoying it so much that I took it in the bathroom with me when I was in there doing my business, and then I heard about this and I was like, oh, that makes some sense now that you think about it. Yeah, why would you take those holy books, these scriptures, into the bathroom and what have you? But I'm not feeling like I was a horrible person for doing that. I was very eager to learn the Dharma, and I just figured, why waste that time? So, but nonetheless, we have to be somewhat careful about these things once we have that knowledge. I think before you have that knowledge, it becomes like, well, if your intention was good, and maybe you took those red flowers to see a sick friend, and you really felt good about maybe they really like red and they enjoyed those flowers. Well, don't feel bad that you did that. Just recognize it now with this additional knowledge, then you can make perhaps a different decision. So anyway, little peripheral topic, but nonetheless, all about kind of how we do practice the Dharma and kind of assimilate it to some degree. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and did you lost your network connection, Laura? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, but you're back now.
yes. I just was
Okay.
wondering if it was probably the internet here.
Yeah,
So,
I didn't notice anyone else
okay,
missing on the thing, but I'm
okay.
glad you're back.
Yeah,
Okay.
me too. Thank you.
All right. Let's go ahead and again, I'll just pull up the the commentary from Geshe-la to go into the next verse. We're up to verse 31 now. So let me scroll down a little bit here. Whoops. These PDF files. Okay, there we go. Verse 31 says, the predicament is whenever, no matter what we do, we fall into decline, which of course can pertain to our Dharma practice, but it can also pertain to our mundane affairs. It is the sharp weapons of bad actions turning against us. Why? For having disregarded actions, karma, as well as cause and results, how we are through the force of our actions creating the results that we experience. Now we should strive in actions of forbearance and so forth. Now, it is worth noting there is a slightly different translation of that last line in some of the other texts. I'll share that later. But let's go into Geshe-la's commentary because it's based on how that line is indicated here. He says for the first line, to fall into decline is, for example, to practice the Dharma, but even though one listens to it, thinks about it, and studies it, one constantly worsens without improving. And even though one meditates, the same thing happens. So we're almost like, not even taking 2 steps forward. We just keep taking 3 steps back. In addition, when this is illustrated with respect to the world or mundane affairs, it is that no matter what business, farming, and so forth one does, one only falls into decline. You never get the success, the results that you're seeking. When this happens, think, this is definitely the bad actions turning against me, particularly of in previous rebirths disregarding actions, disregarding causes and results, without calculating them even slightly, and doing only non-virtuous actions such as killing, beating, stealing, and so forth. So again, this sounds like a pretty wide net that's being cast here, and all of our sort of negative actions that we engaged in have ripened into our inability to succeed at either our spiritual progress or our worldly affairs. But again, the correlation oftentimes, is around specific actions, but here it does seem like it's a bit more general. So then it says, then do taking and giving. And then from now on, we should strive in actions of forbearance, such as readily accepting however many hardships arise while practicing the Dharma, similar to what we just saw right around hardships and the like, without disregarding actions and their results and so forth. In other words, being extremely attentive to following the law of cause and effect, to making sure that we abide by that as best as we can. With that knowledge, we can, of course, achieve whatever we wish. And of course, it can also mean, to some degree, paying attention to mundane cause and effect, because there are certain things we need to pay attention to have worldly success in that vein too. Like if you are a farmer, well, then you know that you have to pay attention to all the various things and knowing what's going to happen weather-wise so that the new seeds don't freeze because of an early frost or late frost or whatever, and that things don't, become problematic. So, I mean, it can mean the causes and effects in a worldly way, but it's mostly, why do you have particular results in your life? Because of the karma you've created. So if you want to achieve success and have good fortune in your spiritual practice and worldly affairs, you have to create the causes for that. It doesn't come about just by like going to college and getting a good degree and having good mentors and whatever in your profession. It comes about because you've created the karma for that. That's always something to remember, and we can even rejoice in those who have had the good karma to get good results in their lives. So this was, again, the way that the verse was set out in our text. This is an alternate version that comes from, it's actually Thupten Jinpa's translation that was used in Venerable Thupten Chodron's book, Good Karma. It says, when I continue to regress despite all my efforts, it is the weapons of destructive karma turning upon me for defying karma and the laws of cause and effect. From now on, I will strive to accumulate merit. So a very different reading of the last line. Now we should strive in actions of forbearance and so forth, versus now I will strive to accumulate merit. I mean, they point in the same direction, absolutely. But we do see that, again, the degree to which we have success in things is frequently triggered by how much merit we've accumulated, how much merit we've created. And don't think that merit is this kind of elusive thing that we don't know about. It's simply good karma. It is engaging in positive actions, generosity, meditation, being patient, all the various things, kindness towards others. Let's see what Venerable Thupten Chodron says on that. She says, if we really took the teachings on karma to heart, we would be more generous with our possessions and finances. We would not be so eager to retaliate when people harmed us. Again, we'd be patient. We would make an effort to meditate daily because we would be certain of the benefits, and even do the additional practices, water bowls and prostrations and whatever it is that we need to do. We would make decisions based on sounder criteria. Which option would enhance my ethical conduct? Which option would facilitate generating bodhicitta and enable me to be of greater benefit to others? Whoops. Which option would have more conducive circumstances for understanding emptiness and its compatibility with dependent arising? We can think about all of our actions in terms of making choices about what we do on the basis of, is it going to support our spiritual practice and our spiritual understanding? Or is it going to become an obstacle for it? One teacher I had said that if we really got the law of karma wholeheartedly, we would give away everything we have right now and have complete confidence that we would be taken care of. That there would be no doubts about it producing the results that it creates, which is you have resources in your life due to the force of your generosity. Again, it's not instant, it's not immediate, but nonetheless, if we had that huge of a thing, if we gave everything we had away at this moment, we're doing that mentally with Tong Len, but I'm saying physically to give it all away, and we had great confidence in it and we had never regretted it for a second, we'd have amazing results from that. At least this is what that one teacher said. But I think this is true. The degree to which we have confidence in karma really does help. All right, the next verse, verse 32. Whenever the rites that are performed go awry, it is the sharp weapons of bad actions turning against us. Why? For having put our trust. I changed it to the dark side. Even dark has these we've gotten into this unfortunate duality around white and black, and it's playing out in our culture even to a large degree. And so I'm trying to be more sensitive to it when I teach the Dharma, but there's a lot of uses of the word black to refer to what is negative, and it's quite unfortunate. But dark side, I mean, we hear that in Star Wars too, right? Luke, turn to the dark side, so, but anyway, the idea is that the side of evil, the side of negativity, we put our trust there. And now the advice is we should turn away from that negative side, turn away from what will cause you suffering, what will cause you problems and difficulties. All right. So let's go to Geshe-la's commentary on this. And then I think I do have a little more to share in one or two additional slides. Geshe-la, this is on page 13, it looks like. There's the verse. Let me go a little bit more so the commentary's there. Nowadays, when ailments arise in the body, there exist a great many rites, such as different rituals and so forth, that begin from people beating drums, ringing bells, and so on. However, when no matter how many of them have been performed, however many pujas and rituals and so on, the ailment continually worsens without any recovery whatsoever. We should not develop a wrong view regarding the rites that were done and so forth, thinking, oh, that's a bunch of hooey, who cares? It doesn't work. This happens, in fact, we, have this perpetuating of our ailment or our difficulties or whatever, in fact, because in previous rebirths, we put our trust in the dark side, in the side of evil, the side of negativity. All the persons and activities that do not accord with the Dharma being that dark side, all the things that are antithetical to the Dharma. Therefore, think, this is the sharp weapons turning against me of the bad actions of putting my trust in them and not having thought about the Dharma even slightly, the side of good that we want to be engaging in as best as we can. So then meditate on taking and giving. He's getting, this included in almost every one of these commentaries now, but again, you will see it missing sometimes. But it's always a good thing to do as part of meditating on each of these verses, to think about taking away the suffering of others who are experiencing that same thing that we ourselves are experiencing, and willingly taking it upon ourselves and giving them our happiness. From now on, we should turn away from that dark side, the evil side, all the activities that are not the Dharma, and practice the Dharma alone. Again, tall order to say practice the Dharma alone, but we have to do what we can to move in that direction. And it always begins with that intention of saying, I want to, as much as possible, every moment of every day, turn away from what is leading me down a non-virtuous path towards what is leading me on the path of virtue. So Geshe Jampa Gyatso, in commenting on this himself, says, why is it that these rituals do not always bring benefit and that our problems only worsen? It is because in our previous lives we engage in activities not on the side of Dharma and that were intended only for the happiness of this life. He kind of qualifies this a little bit more in his commentary, saying that these were actions that were also mostly about the happiness of this existence, which of course is not even practicing Dharma. Remember that Dharma starts when we at least practice the small scope, which is putting our effort towards a good rebirth. If our actions are solely for the comforts of this life, to have money in our bank, to enjoy pleasures, to travel, to do whatever, all these various things that we engage in, to be praised by others, to, have comfort in our lives, well, that's totally non-Dharma. That is not on the side of Dharma. And that's because, again, all it does is it increases our attachment to this life and doesn't allow us to look at goals beyond this life, whether we talk about our next rebirth or liberation and enlightenment. All right, so then we go on to verse 33. Whenever our requests do not reach the three jewels, there's the internet goes out, and so they don't receive our emails. No, I'm just saying this is again, when we make these sorts of requests to the three jewels, to seeking their inspiration, their blessings, and so on, helping to accomplish our aims, and the three jewels seem to be non-existent. They're not there. Nobody's home. It's the sharp weapon of bad actions turning against us for not having had confidence in Buddhahood. Now we should rely upon the three jewels alone. So let's look at how Geshe describes this. This has all to do with kind of our sense of refuge. Again, recall that refuge is a big topic. It's something that we practice throughout our lives. I led a little meditation on refuge on Tuesday for TNL, and I shared the quote that I was told by, I think it was Thupten Dundrup. Venerable Dundrup, he teaches the Discovering Buddhism at Home module for refuge. And he said that Lama Yeshe used to say that you don't really take refuge. In his estimation, you do refuge, which means that that's how you are actively exhibiting your refuge, is what you do throughout your day, how you frame things that you see, how you work with your mind and your actions on the basis of that, how you essentially, make refuge a way of life. And so this is a very powerful way to think about it. And then of course within that we see it's a dynamic process. Many of you might have taken a refuge ceremony where you make a deeper commitment to the three jewels, becoming a Buddha in a Buddhist in a more formal way through taking refuge from a preceptor, a master. And you might even take vows in conjunction with that. But know that that's not the final definition of refuge. Someone who has taken that ceremony and become a Buddhist in a formal way, it means someone who continually puts their faith and confidence in the three jewels as the means to protect us and others from the fears of samsara, the fears of higher rebirths, the fears of continuing to go from life to life, the fears of samsara and nirvana in general, in terms of not wanting to abide in any kind of solitary peace, not wanting to abide in our cycle of existence, wanting to be dedicated to the welfare of others. There are a lot of different ways we can frame our refuge, but it's an active process. It's something that changes over time and that we should be continually looking at and refreshing our sense of confidence in the three jewels. That's why I encourage people, even when we recite the refuge verse at the beginning of class, occasionally, quite frequently, I'll tell people to think about what they're saying. When you say that, think about your own level of safe direction. This is the term Alex Berzin uses for refuge, the sense of safe direction you find in the three jewels. Are they a safe direction for you? Can you have that confidence in them? All right. So let's look at, again, what Geshe says about this in his commentary. Let's go down to verse 33. Desiring excellences such as wealth, status, and so forth for ourselves, but not accomplishing these aims, even though we have made requests for this purpose to the three jewels, is what is meant by our request not reaching the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Now, again, why do you want those things? Why do you want wealth, status, and so on? Well, ideally, you don't want them for the happiness of this life. You want them so you can do things of benefit to others. If we have wealth, then we can share that wealth with others. If we have high status, we can be influential to others, and so on. All the various things that we would want as good results in this human life, we want so we can make good use of it. And so even though we make requests to the three jewels, please bless me with, the causes and conditions that will lead to be able to be of great benefit to others through, having these various things. Even though you might make that prayer, and again, we don't usually pray to the three jewels to give us these things, but we want to, again, keep that connection going, to follow the Dharma to the best of our ability, to have confidence in the Buddha and rely upon the Sangha, the spiritual community that have realizations to help us on our path. So it says, when this happens, when we don't get what we are seeking, even though we've made these very heartfelt requests to the three jewels, we should not develop once more a wrong view towards them, thinking, the three jewels aren't there to help me or to help anyone else. They're not doing what I'm requesting of them, so therefore they're the faulty party. Instead, understand that this is the bad actions turning against us of previously lacking confidence in the inner or Buddhist Dharma and the three jewels, in Buddhahood, in the Buddhas, in the Dharma, and so on, such that even though we were taught this and that from the Dharma, we did not have confidence in it before and thought it is not true that it is like that. So again, this is what we've done is we've turned away from, the three jewels by lacking the confidence in them, by not having that faith of conviction in them that they can protect us and so on. So then, from now on, whatever happiness or suffering arises, we should not seek another refuge. This has been one of the faults that we probably have has contributed, is when we had things go bad in our lives, we turned away from it. We said, it doesn't make any difference whether I have the three jewels in my life because I still have to suffer. And look at, I'm, doing all this stuff and I'm still engaging in, or still having the experience of much suffering in spite of my engaging in the Dharma so wholeheartedly. We can't expect those kinds of results. And that's not a fault on the side of the three jewels. The fault is on the side of our own actions of the past, of having diminished our sense of confidence in the three jewels. So instead, through placing our confidence in the Buddha, the teacher, the Dharma, which is the actual refuge in the state that we are in right now, because that's the real medicine. That's what we actually have to take. And the Sangha, the companions who accomplish refuge, we should rely on them alone. These three jewels are our salvation in a sense. I mean, in Buddhism, we don't usually talk about a savior, though we use the term in some prayers, but the idea is that we need them as a support in order to develop on the path. They are the outer refuge that helps us to become an inner refuge ourselves, to culminate with all of these qualities ourselves, even becoming the three jewels for others. So we do need them in our lives, absolutely. And we shouldn't lose that faith and confidence in them by virtue of these various things that we experience. So here I'm going to share a little bit from Geshe Sopa. I'm sharing a bit more from other texts tonight for some reason. I just found some of what they said to be useful to discuss a little bit. He says, for our spiritual illness, the Buddha is the best doctor. The Dharma is the most effective medicine, and the Sangha is the best nurse and the spiritual friend to be followed and imitated. So this is how we need to think about the three jewels, is with this medical analogy, that the Buddha in his Four Noble Truths essentially was telling us all that we are very, very ill. We don't think we are. Most beings on this planet don't think that they have any major illness going on to this degree. They might have, some physical illness or even some mental problems, what have you, but they don't think of themselves as being this ill. And the beings who aren't having any physical or mental problems right now would never think of themselves as ill. But we are like patients, and we are in the hospital of samsara, and the Buddha is the best doctor, the one that can actually tell us exactly what's going on, can diagnose our problems, our difficulty most completely, and then prescribe the best medicine. And the medicine is the Dharma. as I mentioned earlier, this is what we actually have to take our actual refuge in. Because if we don't practice the teachings, it's like going to the doctor and the doctor gives you this incredible medicine that you could be cured of your ailment, and you never take it. You just keep it in a medicine cabinet. You might even show it to friends and say, oh, I have this incredibly powerful medicine that could get rid of my illness in a flash. They say, oh, does it work? And you say, well, I don't know. I've never taken it. Well, we have to take the Dharma. We have to take the medicine. And then the Sangha. Again, Sangha is, as the Sangha jewel, is defined as those beings who are superior beings, noble ones, or Arya. The word Arya in Sanskrit means superior. Those are the beings who have attained a direct realization of emptiness, a non-conceptual awareness of emptiness in a technical way. We rely upon others in a more broader way, like what we call our community in Taoist. We call that a Sangha. Many other Buddhist traditions call their communities Sanghas. But they aren't the most reliable of companions necessarily, because they haven't developed their minds to that degree. If someone has actually achieved that realization, then as it says here on the screen, they are the best nurse or assistant on our spiritual path, and the spiritual friends that we need to follow and imitate, that we have to actually emulate in terms of our own behavior. And of course, how do we have those three jewels manifesting in our life? In the form of our gurus often. So we talked about that before, so I won't go much more in terms of the gurus and the roles that they play. But just as the best doctor in medicine and nurses cannot help you unless you trust them and comply with their instructions, the three jewels also cannot help you unless you place your trust in them. And by trust, we mean that enduring sense of faith and confidence that we need to cultivate as part of our path, so that when difficulties arise, when problems occur, like what we've been seeing again within our world at large and in our own individual lives, that's our refuge. That's what we turn to. That was another lesson I tried to remind people of when the pandemic started, is that you really have to stop then and say, where is my real refuge? Is my refuge in having the world work out to a way where it's amenable and everything's going smoothly and wonderful? That has never been what the Buddha taught as a refuge, to have a wonderful world all around you. Yes, it's helpful to have things going smoothly so that you don't have quite so many bumps in the road. But, we also need the bumps in the road. I mean, this whole text is about using the bumps in the road as a means to help to awaken. So refuge is something we do when things are going well. Refuge is something we do when things are going poorly. Refuge is for any time in our life, that we recall that what the main thing is that we have to do is to practice the Dharma, keep taking the medicine, taking the medicine. Day in and day out. That's what it's all about. So don't think that there's any other secrets. That's the secret, as obvious as it is. So, all right, let's continue on and do just a little bit more, so we get a little bit further with tonight's teaching. We have whoops, there it goes again. That's a problem again with these PDF files. So verse 34 at the bottom of page 13 of the commentary. Whenever the negativities of degeneration rise as polluted demons and evil spirits, it is the sharp weapons of bad actions turning against us for having accumulated negativities with respect to the deities, the Buddhas. Well, deities can also refer to mundane deities, as we're going to see, but primarily against the Buddhas, or those beings who are beyond this world. And mantras. And mantras is going to have a slightly different definition here, not just in the context of Tantra. Remember how Tantra, it does pop up here and there in this text, unlike some of the other sutra texts. And mantra here means anything which protects the mind. That's the literal meaning of mantra, is that which protects the mind, which is, of course, the Dharma. So we're seeing kind of some commonalities with some of these similar types of things we've engaged in. But here we have this idea of these negativities of degeneration arising in these various forms as polluted demons, evil spirits, and so on. Well, that's because we've collected this negative karma in relationship to mundane, worldly deities, as well as super mundane, beyond this world deities. And mantras, that which protects the mind. So the advice is now we should destroy all conceptualizations, not meaning all thoughts that we have, but all of the mistaken conceptualizations that we engage in that are at the root of our problems, all the way down to self-grasping and, of course, self-cherishing. So the negativities of degeneration that's mentioned in the first line are the negativities of having degenerated one's pledges. There are different translations for this in different texts. I'm not going to go into all of them, but know that this is how it's being presented here, is that these negativities of degeneration are what we engage in when we make commitments to our gurus and so on, through our pledges, our vows, and we let them degenerate. By the force of our bad actions, they inflict harm on us through appearing in the aspect of polluted demons, such as the evil spirits of above and so forth, external physical spirits and so forth. Nowadays, there is renowned to be harmed by king spirits, Zen spirits, and so forth. When this happens, it is because in previous rebirths we accumulated negativities with respect to the deities and mantras. Okay, so I'm going to show a little slide where Geshe-la comments a little bit more on what these various demons and spirits are. I don't think, again, you have to have a confidence in that level of being, though in Tibetan and even in the Indian Buddhist traditions, they do say there are various spirits, which can be beings who are reborn into a sort of spirit realm that can have malevolent tendencies. But of course, you've created karma with them. That's why they appear in those forms. But we can even think about anyone who has a negative disposition appearing in our lives, whether they're a spirit or a human being or an animal or what have you. But nonetheless, we will see a description of those in a moment when we go to the other slides. Deities are the presently non-supermundane deities, the worldly deities, such as the males among mundane beings who are renowned to be gods, as well as the supramundane deities. These are enlightened beings. The glorious four-armed protector, Mahakala, the glorious six-armed Mahakala. These are both Dharma protectors that are embodiments of enlightened mind that can help us on our path. And we've been, accumulating negativities in relation to those beings. It says, is there with respect to whom we have accumulated the negativities of contempt and so forth. The mantras, the other thing we've accumulated negativities towards, in this context are not to be taken to be merely the usual mantras, the aspects of tantric practice. The etymology of mantra is that it is that which acts to protect the mind. Therefore, all the Dharma that protects the mind from the side of non-virtue, that is, all the Dharma cycles of small beings upward, small beings, middling beings, great beings, all of that can be posited as the mantras of this context. So it's just referring to the Dharma because the Dharma is the ultimate protection of the mind. So then in the last few lines, therefore, think, this is the ripening of the negativities accumulated due to having disregarded the holy beings, whether they're mundane beings or supermundane. Mostly supermundane is what we need to be primarily concerned about, but we haven't had that respect for them and engaged in virtue towards them, nor have we engaged in the Dharma wholeheartedly. Instead, we've had negativities towards the Dharma, which protects the mind, whatever level of Dharma we're talking about. Then meditate on taking and giving, Tonglen. Now, the final advice, since they are said to be all the bad conceptualizations discordant to the Dharma, we should utterly destroy them. So again, all these bad conceptualizations are all the ways that we think wrongly about things in our existence. All of the afflictions are bad conceptualizations. They're not truthful. They're not virtuous. They don't lead us to any real, results that are positive. So let's look at what Geshe-la says in his personal commentary, oral commentary on his text. He says, polluted demons are a type of spirit that act to paralyze us. I found this kind of interesting. They include evil spirits that abide above us, such as those of the sun, the planets, Rahula, and so forth, who send bad energy and block our blood circulation, due to which we remain paralyzed. I was talking to my partner here because we've talked about this before, how both of us have had that experience in a dream, and maybe you've had that dream before. And I'm not trying to say it so you'll have this dream, but you've probably had a dream where you were paralyzed in your bed and something was in the room or something and you couldn't move. They're really kind of terrifying nightmares. Maybe that's the manifestation of that. It's hard to say, but again, it's due to karma we've created that has caused that type of a manifestation. Don't maybe again reify these evil spirits too much. They are projections of our own karma that we experience in various ways, and in dreams it can happen, and I imagine it can happen in waking life as well. There are also a type of spirits that people sometimes see, which are called king spirits. I don't know, he didn't go into much more detail on those. And there are also Zen spirits, Zen is a Tibetan word, who are often the incarnation of dead family members and therefore have some power over us. This is why people often talk about, seeing their relatives or whatever, even after they've passed away, these sort of spirits that appear. In fact, when in shamanist Buddhist traditions, people take refuge in their dead relatives and ask for advice from them, these are the Zen spirits that we're talking about. So again, I found that kind of interesting. He shared some additional information that wasn't in his written commentary on those spirits. But again, as I said, don't maybe over personify them and just think that, again, they can be projections of our own karma that are causing these sorts of appearances to occur to us that can sometimes be a bit malevolent, sometimes be not in our best interest. So we have many bad thoughts or conceptualizations that need to be destroyed, he says. In fact, if we are unsuccessful in whatever we do, it is due to bad thoughts that lead us to create negative actions, the result of which is now ripening upon us in terms of these obstacles, these demon, evil spirits, whatever, that are inhibiting our progress. We should resolve that from now until we attain enlightenment, we will act in accordance with the Dharma and never follow negative thoughts. Instead, we need to strive to develop a good heart filled with love, compassion, and bodhicitta, as well as the mind of renunciation and the realization of emptiness. So you might recognize these three, bodhicitta, renunciation, and the wisdom of emptiness, as the three principal aspects of the path. They are the main teachings that are encapsulated within the Lam Rim. This is what we should try to achieve, turn away from those negative actions towards the Dharma and so on, and move in the line in line with the Dharma teachings in terms of all the realizations of the stages of the path, especially these three principal aspects. Okay. That's all we have time for tonight. And I'm sorry, I went right up to the deadline here. Other people have, mentioned that they did have that dream. I think it is a common dream. And maybe, again, I'm not a psychologist to know all of these various things, but I have heard other people say that, yes, they've experienced that. Again, could be a commonality in terms of types of karma we've created that ripen into that type of experience where we're not actually physically paralyzed. You still eventually get up out of bed, out of your sleep, but nonetheless, you have that experience of not being able to move. Anyway. Any comments or questions from tonight? Anything? Okay, yeah, Mary Jo. Unmute your mic, yeah, and then.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
One of those pages about 5 ago,
Uh-huh.
where you were mentioning about the bad karma, about negativity and actions and things can kind of stick with a person, I think. I don't remember the wording, but and I couldn't make a note because it was too fast, but
Okay.
I have this acquaintance and she is just so negative all the time. And I kind of wonder if it's something like that going on. She's got a very smart mind, but she's tired of living and she's upset. She's been living for years with a vacuum cleaner hose attached to her tailpipe, and just to be ready. And she's totally bummed because her caretakers have undone all those things, and it's craziness. But I'm just thinking about her because I had a conversation with her today, or I tried to listen anyway. But it seems like it might be something like that going on.
Right, right. I think the verse may have been the one where we talked about the dark side. Was that the?
Maybe I think
Yeah.
probably very dark. Yeah.
I mean, because we talk about dark side as being the side of non-virtue, but nonetheless, we can also talk about the dark side of the afflictions themselves that we tend to wallow in or become um, more familiar with, so that we always have negative thoughts towards others, towards ourselves, towards the world at
Yes.
large. Become
Yes.
what the word I think is like malanthropic, right? When you like kind of hate the world and all the beings in it.
Oh, yeah, like
Yeah.
that.
Um, I know people like that too. I think it's really hard to break them out of that because again, that has become the habituation. It's
Yeah.
it's
Mhm.
yeah. I mean, in terms of any advice, well, I think, once more, we just have to try to be that light that shines into those dark corners as best as we can. But
Yeah.
we're coming from a very different place. So it's very hard to meet people from that place and have an effect. Sometimes it is karmic, whether we can have an effect on somebody like that or not.
Yeah.
And, don't give up on people like that. Certainly try to keep the candle burning in there. It's good you've got candles burning there as well for others, but for people like that, you yourself needing to be sort of the candle that brings some light into their lives, and that shows that it's not all bad. People aren't all, worthless, and what have you. All the thoughts that people have when they're in such a negative state of mind. But it's a tough one, Mary Jo. I don't know, maybe others have some
Mm.
recommendations about things to do, but I'm not sure what were you asking for some advice on that or just to have an
Well, I was
understanding?
just needing to kind of verbalize,
Mm,
it helps me a little bit to put it, to say maybe this is a karmic kind of a thing going on. Maybe I need, well, I know that I probably can't interrupt it, but, maybe that's just kind of what's going on. It was kind of a little light shining on me, like, oh, maybe that's a part of what this is about.
mm,
And maybe there's really no really way to interrupt it, or much less change its course or
right.
change her mind, but just to kind of, maybe it helps me have a little bit more patience with it,
Mm,
because I really get quite impatient, and I just have to watch my mouth very carefully.
sure,
And
sure.
uh, so yeah, and I haven't been lighting a candle for her, and I will.
Mm.
Um, Maybe that's the best thing I can do.
Well,
Um,
and as we see in this text, practice Tonglen, as uncomfortable
ah,
as it might be to breathe in all of her negativity, to kind of
thank
think,
you,
I
thank you,
I'll take your negative state on myself. I will, endure that and be with that and place it on myself, cherishing mine and destroy it. And then give her light and love and happiness and, whatever it is that she needs, have what
thank
you
you.
have transform into that. I think Tonglen is one of the most important practices just to always rely on. When nothing else can be done, do Tonglen. Or even if something else can be done, still do Tonglen. Tonglen is,
Yes.
I think, just really the heart of so much of our practice, especially in the Mahayana tradition. But
Well, so often though, I might not remember that. So thank
no,
you very much. Yeah.
sure, sure. I mean, another thing that might be useful, if she has anything that you've picked up from your years of knowing her that brings her any type of joy or happiness, is to maybe, bring that into her life. If she's ever said like, oh, that the Dalai Lama seems like kind of a nice guy or something, well, maybe you give her a picture of the Dalai Lama and you say, and put it in a nice, beautiful frame so that it has something that she'll actually want to put on her wall and maybe give her some little joy or light in her life. That's another idea, I think, is, to give something physical that can be symbolic of that, that is from your heart to her, to try to throw the
Yeah.
lifeline, if you will, out to her her, so that you kind of create that connection and really think about wanting to be enlightened to benefit her in a much better way than what we currently can. That's another thing to remember. When we see
Oh,
these types of situations where we feel like our hands are tied, like we really can't do much to help others, that should be more impetus for us to say, and this is why I need to become enlightened, because it's so
yeah.
hard to help others.
Thank you. Those are very helpful ideas. Thank you.
Yeah.